hidden away. A young girl writes treasured thoughts by candlelight, yet unaware, with hopes held fast. These secret words were her last. First book and last, a child's tone, candid whisper, a secret home, unsilenced now for every age, Anne's testament on every page, an offered kiss, a girl admired, her innocence and youth inspired, a passion burns in the diarist's heart, a secret wish, a forgotten start. First book and last, a child's tone, candid whisper, a secret home, unsilenced now for every age, Anne's testament on every page. Betrayed by friends, Nazis took her away to the camps. Her words remained, her breath cut short, lives through her pen, though censored once, and lives again.
I have to unmute the microphone and pull up my Logitune because I had a completely different lighting setup last time. Hello. You guys are gonna have to forgive me the green hoodie again. It's not that I just don't wash this hoodie and just sit here in it every day. I'm going for a look. It's cold outside, and I'm going for a look that's either um, comfortable atheist preacher or depressed Irish book boyfriend. You won't know until I talk. Just want to sit here by the wee window. Look out at the world. I wonder if this is what Michael Collins died for, you know. Yeah, have a pint. Eric Fergus. It's going up, you know. Look, it was never meant to be a die. But my sister's by. It was meant to be never meant to be an orphan, you know. So there we are. We well. Hi. I want to share something with you. I tried to do the old-fashioned way, but for some reason it's not working today, so we're gonna do it the way old-fashioned way. Now I'm in Irish. Not really sure which Irish this is. There's a Mormon Irish creator who's a scholar. I won't give you his name, but I was complaining about him to a friend in the ex-Mormon space and saying, "Look, I don't have any problem with the guy for being Irish. I don't have any problem with him if he's tongue-tied. I'm just saying that every time I go to bitch about his scholarship, I don't understand a damn word he says. And I know a few Irish accents. There are like several. I know a few. I cannot understand a word this guy says. Anyway, I want to share something with you. Let me see. Last time, let's just go the old school way. Okay. Morning, Jules. I'll share this with you. Let's see if it works. Okay, got it. Have this little. Cool. Let's try it. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
So, but you can't do that in Church of England. You can't say, you must have tea and cake with the vicar or you die. You can't have extreme points of view. You know, the Spanish Inquisition wouldn't have worked with Church of England. Talk, will you talk? But it hurts. Well, loosen it up a bit, will you?
You guys hear that okay? Everybody, you guys hear that there? So this is Susie Izzard, who says that she doesn't mind if people misgender her with he, him. Hey, are we well? Still look right. But she has announced that her pronouns are also she, her, and that she is to be referred to as Susie. But apparently she has a channel that still says Eddie. So, and I've heard her say that she doesn't mind if people dead name her because people know her as Eddie for so long. But in any event, this was a comedy set that we used to do all the time, me and my Mormon friends when I was younger. And I keep thinking about it this week.
That's what it would be. Tea and cake or death. Tea and cake or death. Tea and cake or death. Students with beer. Tea and cake or death. Tea and cake or death. Little red cookbook. Little red cookbook. You know, because cake or death, that's a pretty easy question. Anyone can answer that. Cake or death? Cake, please. Very well. Give him cake. Oh, thanks very much. Very nice. You, cake on.
So this set is called everybody. Can everybody hear that okay? Let me know in the comments there. So this set is called Circle. And she did this great bit about the Spanish Inquisition. And and she was like she was saying that one day the Pope was trying to the Catholic Church saw that they were losing. They're going to lose in the scope of history, and so they started. Even the Pope, John Paul II, decided to apologize for the Great Inquisition. Yes, it was far too inquisitive. She said that yes, it was supposed to be the Great Spanish Casual Chat. Like, tell me, Don Miguel, tell me about El Diablo. It's like, oh, El Diablo. El Diablo is a very snazzy dresser, very good with the ladies. Tell me, Padre, what do you ask? Oh, no problem. Just a casual chat. And so she's comparing Catholicism to the Church of England. Church of England is totally different. That's going to become relevant, I promise.
Death. Cake for me too, please. Very well. Give him cake too. We're going to run out of cake at this rate. You, cake or death? Death, please. No, cake, sorry, cake. You said death first. Death first. No, I meant cake. Oh, all right. You're lucky I'm Church of England. Cake or death? Cake, please. Well, we're out of cake. We only had 3 bits and we didn't expect such a rush. So what do you want? So my choice is or death? Well, I'll have the chicken then, please. Taste of human, sir. Do you like a white wine? There we go. Thank you very much. Thank you for flying Church of England. Cake or death? I asked for the vegetarian. Yes, the vegetarian. Yes, there we go, Mr. Hitler. There we go. Like a little wine? Thank you very much. You Nazi shithead.
This is not Circle. I don't know what I'm thinking. This is Dress to Kill. Anyway, there's a good one. I think Circle is the one where she does the bit. Or it might have been this one. She does the bit about the British Empire as the world's largest empire to collapse under the weight of the phrase. Oh, do you think so? Ah, are they? Oh, it wasn't quite as simple as that. You see, colonization destroyed the world, created America, but it also destroyed the world. And actually, America has kind of been a big part of that. And the Catholic Church was a big part of that. I was watching, some of you were with us on Charlatans Never Change, when we were watching some Mormons talking about how this white supremacist rant they are just really on right now. I mean, like, the white supremacy is like, it's like background noise in Mormonism most of the time. And like, ever since this Nick Shirley thing came about, their new Tim Ballard, it's ramped up to like 11 here. I mean, it's just like, they're like, oh, I guess we can just go ahead and just be racist. All right, let's do this thing, you know? And it's been, you know, since the 1970s, that's like been at this fever pitch. It's like, they're just like, yeah, we'll just shout from the rooftops now, you know, black people are this, you know, what's worse, you got Mexicans and you've got Muslims and everything. Anyways, but they were talking about how these comparisons in Mormons, the new thing is, and among conservatives, to compare Islam to Mormonism. And on this week's Charlatans Never Change, I showed how Nick Shirley, Ward Radio's Cardinals, the Stick of Joseph's Hayden Paul, and his brother, and now Kai Schwimmer, who I didn't even know who that was. I have since come to know who that is. And let me tell you, it's frightening. Yeah, maybe we'll get a little more into him, but I'm trying to decide if it's worth creating content to label these young men for the rest of their lives. It's a little bit frightening to think that how well these young men have bought into racism. Anyway, but they were talking about how Islam is the most violent religion in the world and how it has to do with the differences between Islam and Christianity. And I just cannot get my head around it. You know, people talk about genocide. I gave an emergency sermon on this about a year ago, called the Lamanites blossoming as a desert in the rose, as a rose in the desert, excuse me, is genocide. It's a longer title, but it was important because there's this Mormon creator. I mean, the guy seems like a perfectly decent, nice fellow. I don't think he realizes what he's calling for. And because having been Mormon, I know what it's like to have this hum of white supremacy going on in your head all the time. But because it drowns out any sense of human decency, that might be natural to you because you've just known it all your life. You don't recognize it. And you have to be able to recognize it in yourself and ask yourself difficult questions like, shit, man, am I racist? Do I need to change? And then ask yourself and really be able to know. That's why I tell people, it's easy to say, oh, you're neurotic, as if that's a bad thing. And sure, neuroticism won't get you very far in life, but it at least can tell you to stop being a dickhead. Sorry. And it's like that's important in life to come to the realization that apparently I've been racist my whole life, and be able to at least go on and to make that shift, to make that change. We talk about making a change in direction, growing as a person. If that's what spirituality is, one of the most spiritual acts you can do is to ask yourself, man, am I an asshole? Do I need to change? Like, is there something wrong with me? Why do I do these things? Has it always been like this? Right? And one of these was this idea that Islam is dangerous because they go out and force their way by the sword. I read this quote by Joseph Smith. I said, these guys don't realize they're exposing Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith had this quote where he said that he would be to this generation a second Muhammad, whose motto in suing for peace was Al Quran. He said the Al Quran, apparently. Doesn't know that you say the or you say al. You don't say both. The Quran or the sword. So would it be with us, Joseph Smith, or the sword. He said that he would make one gore of blood from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean. And he spread their religion. We will spread our religion by the sword. And that's what that was their own religion. They don't even realize that they're exposing their own prophet. What I didn't really get or what didn't really seem relevant or important at the time to mention, I decided to save for today. Pretty sure I didn't even mention this on Wednesday, which is that when people talk about genocide, we generally think of people dying in the millions. And, and that, of course, has happened many times. Or we think about, sometimes, people think about this other side of genocide, which is that if you take the history, the identity away from people's children, that is also genocide. And in a very real way, it may be the worst kind of genocide because you don't just eliminate people. You eliminate them as a people by stealing their children, by stealing their history. And there is, to my knowledge, no movement in the history of the world that has done that to anyone like Christianity has. We memorize as children that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and we hear about the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and we make little cutouts of these boats, and we went back in my days, we would make like little headbands. I didn't like doing this then, but not for any moral reasons. I thought it was dumb. Where you would make little Indian feathers and headbands and take pictures wearing them, right? And then you'd have mock Thanksgivings. This is much later in history, but yeah, mock Thanksgivings with Indians and pilgrims, buckles on their hats and buckles on their shoes, and that was that was cute. That was fun. when we were kids, and some adults like to dress us up with these stories, create this story that we had no idea was propaganda. We had no idea that this had to do with us reenacting the genocide of countless people. And we certainly didn't learn about the doctrine of discovery. Because you see, before the Americas were colonized, before they were called the Americas, before they were fully discovered to exist by the Catholic world, of course, they weren't the first to discover the lands here. There were people here when they got here, and there were Europeans even who had come to the Americas before that, but they were first discovered by the Catholic world. That's what happened. They were first really discovered, especially the Caribbean, was discovered by the Catholic world. And that's when the Pope circulated a bull with the doctrine of discovery, which was that it was the responsibility of the sovereigns of every Catholic nation to convert all indigenous peoples to Christianity and get them on the books as Christians. Or if any nation refused to submit to Catholicism and become Christian, then they could be put to the sword or taken as slaves. And, one of the things that inside the ex-Mormon paradigm that we argued about for a while there, and then I feel like it kind of got dropped or maybe just forgotten about, is that there was this video that Hansen did a few years ago talking about how Christopher Columbus is actually a great guy. In Mormonism, it's important that that Christopher Columbus is a good guy because the Book of Mormon predicts him as being that one day this man would come to America who would be moved upon by the Spirit of God. So it's a part of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon that America was founded as a consequence of Christopher Columbus and his divine mission to come to the Americas. Listen, when you say there's nothing white supremacist about the Book of Mormon, this is in First Nephi. This is basic. This is setting up the whole story. You don't get it without this. And the whole thing is about the doctrine of discovery, which is the idea that everybody had to be converted to Christianity or murdered or enslaved and their wealth taken. And it was the justification for the genocide of so many people that we don't even know how many there were. And you can say, well, I mean, okay, but you can't compare what they did, what Catholicism did to the Western Hemisphere to, for example, the Holocaust. Can't you? It took a longer time, and it perhaps wasn't streamlined with the same level of precision. But let me tell you, living under that system for the indigenous peoples of this hemisphere was not better. Living as slaves, it was not better. And sure, maybe they weren't conducted upon, medical experiments upon. Maybe not. We don't know. Not quite like the Germans did. The Germans or the Italians. And or the Russians. But frankly, while that was happening in Europe, and we can say, well, could never happen here. Here in America, there were Japanese internment camps, and there were German internment camps. In the same sphere, same time. And but I got off on a rant on Wednesday about Benito Mussolini, and I was thinking about that today, because I want to take that to the next place. Because there's this idea, right? Cake or death. What we're given this idea about religion today. That today religion is, soft. It's passive because they need to get people to still put offerings in the plate. They need to get people to still come put their butts in the pews. So don't say anything that'll be too controversial. Don't say anything that is too religious at the pulpit, or we won't get people to come in anymore. It won't be fun. And so you have two kinds of Christian religions these days. You have the people, the pastors, who drum up the fears of people, drum up their prejudices, and get them in here and say, well, it's a little tiny church with its little tiny tent off in the woods, or this is this little tiny church just trying to make it, just trying to strive. And then you'll talk about it. They'll talk about it like, oh, it's so important to go to church. Show God that you love him. Show God that you are humble, and so forth. They'll do this whole moral dance, and then they'll wind up going to church and hearing sermons and somebody's shouting about them to them about how, oh, I suppose it's not politically correct anymore to say, and then say some really horrendous racist or misogynist or homophobic crap. So you have the churches like that, and then you have the churches that are out there saying pretty much the exact opposite. And the irony for me lately is that the one you hear about these days is the Episcopalians. And how often in the last year, since fascism, we're not supposed to say that, but oh well. I've never been one to be told to shut up and not tell the truth. That's how I got kicked out of the Mormon church, and apparently it's how I apparently will get labeled a terrorist by the Trump administration. But okay, I'll never be told I can't tell the truth. I'll be told it, and I'll hear it even, but I won't abide by it. There we go. And but every time you hear about the Episcopalians, it seems to me, because it's like, Episcopalians, they're just happy to be here. That's kind of the realm of Christianity now. It's like, oh, you got the Catholics. We have the Catholics over here that we don't talk about. Then you have normal Catholics. They're Sunday Catholics, or they are, Christmas and Easter Catholics. They're lapsed Catholics. Hey, lapsed Catholics. Hey, good to see you. And then you got the true blue Catholics. You got the like Mel Gibson type Catholics. We don't talk about. And then you got Protestants, and they're on one. And then you got Protestants that are not so on one, that are just kind of normal. They're dying off because, well, people. It turns out people went to these churches to hear the controversial stuff. They went to church to hear the racist stuff. They went to church to hear the misogynistic stuff, and then say, oh, it's just so nice to hear the word of the Lord. And nobody's supposed to say, is your Lord a woman hater? Is your Lord a Jew hater? Is your Lord is your Lord what? No, it's church. What do you think we preach at church? When you preach out of that Bible, you're gonna get some pretty hateful stuff, because that book was written by ancient peoples who were pretty racist, pretty misogynistic, pretty homophobic. What are you talking about? You must be reading a different Bible. There are multiple kinds of Bible, but they're all pretty much one Bible. And that's what people went to church for. Wanted to hear this stuff. And to get preached at about this stuff. And when churches started softening about it, well, then people stopped showing up in the pews, because it turns out that for a lot of people, church was just a way to get together, be hateful. And that's why all of a sudden, when there were these really racist events happening in America the last several years, and we don't need to say what those gatherings were for, but they weren't church. At least they weren't supposed to be. They're supposed to be political. So in America, we're supposed to keep those separate. That's the whole idea. Those people like Kai Schwimmer who say otherwise, they're wrong. No. This is it. This America is supposed to be separate. It's supposed to keep church to church and separate and state to state. Ask freaking James Madison. Ask Thomas Jefferson. This is the whole point from the beginning. I talked about this ad nauseum. But the are you nauseated? But then I was, but so I've been pondering this about how the one organization that you hear differently about are Episcopalians. They're just happy to be here. And then we have the Episcopalians. They're just happy to be here. Until President Trump went to a sermon not long after he was inaugurated. I don't know if you remember this. And was told directly by a preacher from the pulpit to not stir up this hate. And he was called out. He was put on the spot. And it turns out, Church of England, Cake o' Death, went a little, started to warn a little bit on the cake. Say, you know what? Listen, we're going to run out of cake at this rate. At some point, this rhetoric, this hateful rhetoric, has consequences, and people will get hurt. And this is not the time for that kind of leadership. This is a time when we need leaders who are moral people. And whether that was you, sir, before or not, it's got to be you now. And it was, I don't know if you remember this, but it was, I remember thinking, well, it's hard to argue with that. What argument will they come up with that? Here you go, Church of England. The English Christians going to bat for the people not on a political basis, on a moral basis. Meanwhile, there were still these rallies happening all over this country that were revivals. Then Charlie Kirk was murdered, which he shouldn't have been. No one should be killed for their beliefs. But Charlie Kirk was murdered, and they had this wake for him, this funeral for this man who was not a good person. But he was a Christian, and people went to grieve him who didn't know anything about him. They still don't know anything about him. You ask a person who says, well, we are Charlie Kirk, and say, name me one thing Charlie Kirk believed in. Well, he believed in having debates. Okay, there are lots of people who have debates. What was he debating on behalf of? What does Talking Points USA exist for? Do you know the history of this? Because there's a lot of people in the world who weren't paying attention to the things he said. Well, I don't blame them, because the things that Charlie Kirk said and the things Charlie Kirk did made a lot of Christians feel embarrassed of Christianity, and made a lot of conservatives feel embarrassed of conservatism. It wasn't until he died that they said, well, now we get to make a new version of him and invent him in the public image that they want, with simple phrases. And nobody can go out and dig out clips of things that he says and say, your boy said this. Do you know your boy said this? Do you know your boy said this? This is what the man said. This is what the man did in life. Is that what makes him a good person? Now you're just being mean. He said it into a microphone, into a camera, in front of a crowd, because he was getting paid to do it. And he was a sellout. He wasn't a Christian soldier. Charlie Kirk was a mercenary. He would believe anything that he was paid to believe, and had to fire people he hired into Talking Points USA for being too racist. You fire one person for being that you had hired for being too racist. That's an unfortunate thing. You fire 2 people for being too racist, both of whom you hired. And maybe you have a problem. Maybe you have a systemic problem. And he had a systemic problem. Talking Points USA, if it didn't have billionaires behind it paying for it, there's no way it would still exist. You realize this organization, Talking Points USA, it exists as a hate mongering scheme paid for by wealthy donors who will literally pay anybody anything to help them win elections, and the consequences be damned. They don't care. If it emboldens people who are hateful, they don't care. They're into it. Be more hateful. They'll gin up the hate. They'll do it. They'll do everything they can to stir up hate. And it's not even because they themselves are hateful, though I'm sure many of them are. Don't know them personally. They all say, most of the ones I see say hurtful things at some point, say hateful things. But they will get paid and they will win elections if they get people to be hateful and to call for the end of people and to call for marginalizing already marginalized groups. And so the way that we counteract this morally as people is to say, okay, look, you vote how you vote. But as human beings, we have to be able to look into ourselves, into our own hearts, and say, am I supporting this? Am I doing something to support this? And that's why people make choices about whether or not they're going to shop at certain companies. You remember what happened with Chick-fil-A, right? Now I see people telling me that they, how happy they are, or saying online how happy they are to finally be able to eat Chick-fil-A again because a gay couple got married in their parking lot or something. I don't remember what the story was, something like that. And it's like, and they celebrated it. They tweeted it or something like that. I'm looking at this. I'm like, you're telling me that performative little piece of action undid all of the hurt that was done by this Christian-owned organization telling the world that homosexuals were the devil? That undid all that? Wow. Cool. I don't know. I think I just don't like their chicken. Anyway, I don't know what it is. I don't like it. But yeah. But people make choices on where they shop based on that. This is a significant reason why I feel dirty every time I step into the doors of a Hobby Lobby, because it didn't have what I wanted at Michael's, knowing full well that I felt this way when I went to Michael's and found out about the politics of people who run Michael's. And it's like, I still need chalk. I still need, sketch pads. I still need it. And what am I going to do? Go online, buy it from Amazon? Shit. It's just bad options. But at some point, people make choices. We start to make our choices based on what we directly or indirectly endorse. And that is based upon our feelings. That is based on what's going on inside of us, whether or not we are aware, whether or not we take the time to inform ourselves, whether or not we take the time to educate ourselves. And then all of a sudden, tragedy strikes. And by the time that the temperature on racial hate, religious hate, LGBTQIA plus hate, homophobic hate, transphobic hate, by the time it dials up to the point that people are being killed, it's very hard to reverse. And it's especially once it dials up to violence, it's very hard to reverse without violence. And in fact, and then the violence turns up, and the violence starts getting amplified. Now all of a sudden, they're being violent, so we have to be violent. Uh, There's only two directions for it to go. We go up with the violence, or we go down with the violence. Well, how are you supposed to solve the problem? Okay, the only way that violence resolves violence is by eliminating the other violent faction. It's the only way. It becomes civil war. It becomes, oh, well, apparently we have to decide people do deserve to die for what they believe at that point. And then so it can go that way, and it can solve that way. It can resolve. But if it resolves that way, you'll be burying a lot of people. And you'll be burying people who you love. It never works out any other way. Civil wars are wars between brethren and sistren. Wars between wars in families. That's how that works every time. And I had said something on Wednesday that I wanted to go over a little bit. And it's going to be a little bit gruesome. So I'm going to get through it as quickly as I can. I said this, people should say more often, do you know how Mussolini died? And I hate to sound like that dad who knows way too much about World War II. But I do know. I am a dad, and I do know way too much about World War II. And one of the things I find remarkable that we don't talk about in America especially is how Benito Mussolini, the man who invented the word fascism, died. And it's the first thing that I said when I read that there's an executive order that was issued last year. During, I think I want to say it was September or October, that said that a group is considered a domestic terrorist group if they are against, among other things, if they are against fascism. I just couldn't help but I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Are you kidding me? Is this who we are? Did that just got put out there? Is everybody calm? Is everybody okay here? That just got put out there. This is America, right? Do I not know what America is? Do I not know what fascism is? Because if I feel like I do. I feel like I do. And I don't think that people do. I don't think anybody can say that they know what fascism is if you don't know how Mussolini died. Maybe that is a little bit judgmental and a little bit, but look, I think people need to know this. We tend to think of World War II as having ended in 1945. And then it was over. We defeated the fascists, and then the fascists went away. But the fascists don't go away. They just go quiet. There were a handful of leaders who went away because they died. There was no other way. When it got when the hate gets that fervent, the leaders end up gone because there's just no other way. And every time I think about how we are escalating towards that, I think we'll call for the end of violence on all sides and say, whoa, nobody has to be violent here. We can stop. We can be reasonable. We are all sensible people. There's no reason for everybody to turn up the hate to the point where it gets violent. until the violence escalates, and it's obvious that at least one side of that equation just doesn't care if it becomes violent. And that's why I say it's important to know how Mussolini died. And I think part of the reason why people don't know how Mussolini died, when you ask them that, is because it's so gruesome. But that's why I'm going to get through the description of it pretty quickly for you here, okay? But I think that the real reason why there are people in the world who don't want us, and when I say this, I'm being vague, but I'll have to point out that I don't mean the Jews, because there's always, whenever you have at least so many people, you have to, and you say, well, there are people, some people will hear you say the Jews. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm not, let the Jews be okay. Let them be at peace if they in any way can. Let us all be at peace if we in any way can. And nobody is, the conspiracy isn't between an entire race of people or an entire religious group. It's between people who have money and want more. And will do anything to get it. They'll do anything. They will do anything. People know that IBM sold machines to the Germans during the war. That's just known, right? People know that there are businesses here in America that did business with the Germans during the war. Because they weren't, it's easy for us now to look back and say, well, we were all against the fascists back then. We weren't, actually. We weren't. One of the core books that was used for, one of the central propaganda books that was used to sell hatred of Jews in Europe is still being used today by the so-called QAnon people. And they still circulate. You'll hear them talk about it. This book. I'm going to say the name of it now so that we know when you hear people talk about this, they're talking about a book that was basically invented by the Russians, by the Russian secret police, we think, to stir up hatred of Jews during the pogroms. And this is the anti-Jewish movement in Russia. And the book was called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And if you've ever heard, well, let's not use too many loaded terms, censored terms, because we definitely don't live under Big Brother. You ever heard about that there's a group of people that meet together and they have satanic ceremonies where they sacrifice babies or they do dirty things to babies or children, and they drink their blood because they know that there's this magical power or this secret power, blah, 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 blah. You've heard of this, okay? This is basically the whole QAnon spiel, right? All of this was invented by Russian secret police to try and convince Russians that that Jews were their enemy. And it didn't really take in Russia. Of course, the pogroms went on, but they just used the police to do it. There's a song that dates back to the pogroms in Yiddish, which the title of it, I'm trying to remember what it is in Yiddish, but anyways, the title of the song is effectively "Fuck the Police," because the police in Russia were the ones that went out and rounded up the Jews, and that was the purpose of the police, part of the purpose of the police. And the men who were standing there overseeing the whole thing as townspeople in Russian towns, and the police went out and started rounding up Jews, the guys overseeing it were the fathers of the Russian Orthodox Church. Whoops. Because that's just how they enforced that. They didn't need a book to sell them on it. Well, they took that book, so that book went international, translated into German, and there it had some effect. But that was in German. Somehow it ended up in English here in America. Who takes this book written by Russians to stir up hatred of Jews, translated into German to stir up Germans to hatred of Jews, and sits there and says, I'm going to publish this in English here in America? Do you know what the answer is? It's Henry Ford. Yeah, that Henry Ford. Yeah. Once upon a time, the only people who are willing to stand up and say, this is wrong. You're making enemies out of people who are not your enemy, and you're imagining them in a way that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't reflect who they are. And it every time we think that it's gone away, you wind up with Candace Owens or some variation of Candace Owens taking to the airwaves to say, "Oh, we've been warned about these people," and then it's like, now it's all of a sudden we're talking about Jews again. And it's like it doesn't go away. It goes quiet. It doesn't go away. There's always going to be somebody who feels weak and insecure. And when they feel weak and insecure, they need somebody to blame. And so so this is why it's important for us all to be able to look inwardly and to say to ourselves, am I part of this? Am I standing apart from it enough? That was a nice little tangent. The way that Mussolini died was that his people, the Italian people, had had enough. And they found him when he was trying to escape to Switzerland. Nice. And when they found him, they lined him and his girlfriend up against the wall and gunned them down with machine gun fire. And threw their bodies on a stack of bodies of other fascists. The man who actually wrote the book on fascism, like an actual book, not metaphorically, like he wrote a book that was called that. And before that, fascism really hadn't been a word. He created that word. And that man, who was so well loved when he was elected, oh yeah, sure. Because the speeches were great. You've seen these, I don't know if you've seen this, there's footage now on YouTube. You can see footage that somebody has gone through. Like I said, they don't go away, they go quiet. People have taken speeches by Hitler and used AI to replicate his voice and then translate the whole speech into English and then make the whole speech in English so people can hear it in his tone, in his cadence, with his voice, but in English. And people were recording videos of themselves listening to Hitler's speeches and nodding along like, this guy's making a lot of sense. Are you kidding me? This is how it happens. They don't go away, they go quiet. Because they know if they're quiet for long enough, we'll forget. That we'll forget, and then they can just come back once it quiets down. People go, okay, well, it couldn't have been that bad. Couldn't have been that bad. Do you know what happened to these people? Do you know who they are? Do you know what happens here? There's a reason why people say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Here we are, doing that. And Mussolini died when he and his girlfriend, who was not, don't feel sorry for her, she was a terrible person too, he and his mistress, were gunned down by their own people. And their bodies and the bodies of other fascists like them were sent to Milan to a gas station in the town square where people, ordinary people, had been executed as enemies to the state because they were communists. Let somebody sell you. Conservatives on Newsmax or Fox News will sell you all day on that socialism and communism are Marxism, and that's who the fascists were. They were all Marxists. No. The fascists were the ones who were against Marx, who were against Marxism, who were against collectivism. They were the ones who wanted power concentrated to the hands of a handful of powerful Christian men, and I do mean men, who had all the money and they felt deserved to have more, and had all the power and they felt deserved to have more. because they were the righteous dominion of God. They were the righteous hand of God. That's how Mussolini sold the word fascism to the world. And for a while, people were happy to have it. People were happy to be a part of it, but it wasn't new. It was the same tyranny that that America was sold as being the solution to. That Americanism was sold as the solution to. It's just tyranny by a new name. And the man who invented the word fascism was nailed up by his ankles, or at least hung up by his ankles. I think he was actually tied by his ankles with his cohorts, with other fascists, in the town square where communists had been executed. And for all the people to see, this is what happens. Now, you can say that that's not fair. Fair enough. But when you say it's not fair, or that it's not right, okay. But does that need to be pointed out? And if it's not fair and it's not right, we have to look at the whole situation. The whole situation I put to you is this. And this is a controversial take, maybe. It's mine. But I say what I think. It's gotten me into trouble. And I'm still not likely to stop. But that's called self-awareness there. When you deny when a tyrant denies due process to his own people long enough, they will deny due process to him. That's why Vladimir Putin, they say, stood there watching the feed of the people of Tripoli executing Muammar Gaddafi in the most brutal way. When the news coverage here in America, they stopped covering it. It's like, whoa, turn the feed off. They stopped covering it. It was horrific. When people get access, when people who have been hurt and killed by their own government get access to their own government's leaders without a system of courts that they can trust, that they feel they can trust, the end result is so much more brutal than anything that could be delivered by a court. This is the reason why we believe, as human beings, that civilized nation has courts. Because we know that if the people take it into their own hands, if ordinary people take their oppressors into their own hands, there's definitely not going to be fair treatment for them. And in the minds of the ordinary people, that's as fair as you can, because they didn't have any thought to fairness when they started to persecute us. So we got no mercy at their hands. They get no mercy at ours. And that's the reason why Hitler took the short road out and gave it also to his new bride and to his dog. I think he gave it to his dog because he couldn't bear the idea of anybody else getting his dog. What does it say about his wife? Anyway, but this is the culture that we live in. It either escalates the violence up, or we de-escalate the violence. I think it's important to think about how we can de-escalate the violence, even though it's not going to be easy, because that generally isn't the way that violence goes. Violence either goes up, or generally goes up. It generally accelerates and accelerates and accelerates until it reaches a level where somebody says, okay, we're just going to take all the guys causing the violence, causing the worst of the violence, and we're just going to take them out of the world. And when they did that after the Nuremberg trials, men who were engaged in this hatred in from Germany and Austria and Italy, but mainly from Germany. Um, you know, they were executed after making their defense, which was we were just following orders. It won't fly. When hatred becomes an order, when orders are based on hatred, and people, foolishly deceive themselves into thinking, well, nobody can blame me for following orders. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I was taught to do. It's what the system required me to do. It's a con, and it's one of the reasons why we're supposed to learn from history. Is because if the fact of the matter is that once it gets to a certain level, I was just following orders won't fly. It will not fly. That's why it's important for me. That's why I ask people. And it seems gruesome, and I seem like an a-hole to some people. I'm sure I do. Okay? But I ask people as often as I can, do you know how Mussolini died? And when I get, especially with the younger people, who is that? I am patient about it. I have a prepared answer. But I have a prepared answer for everything, but almost everything. But I generally keep a prepared answer. I say Mussolini was like what Hitler was to Germany, but he was to Italy, except that he was Hitler's hero. He was the one that inspired Hitler to do what he did. And they say, I don't even know who that is. I say, okay, well, you need to read a history book about that, or watch a video. In fact, I've often said recently, we need just a series of short videos that are just like 1 minute to 2 minutes long. It's like, okay, this is stupidly short, but here it is. This is who these people were. So that because we have whole generations in this country right now of young people coming up, young people who can vote, young people who are starting families, young people who are raising children and don't know who Hitler was. And we want to shelter our children from certain things. We don't want them to be depressed. We don't want them to be terrified of the world. But at the same time, we need them to know this was terrible. We've seen this before. We know how this ends. And it's not pretty. It's bad. And it's happened frequently in history, much more frequently than people report in on or think about. Where was it going? Oh yeah, Mussolini. Sorry. But I'll tell them, I say, listen, Mussolini was a bad leader who was popular when he was new because he told people that they could escape the Great Depression if they would let him gather a handful of righteous men to rule over them and just cut out the middlemen, cut out the bureaucrats, cut out the government, cut out all this wasteful spending in the budget. Let a handful of men who know what they're doing, rich men who know what they're doing, come in and take over everything, run it like a business. And if those righteous men of God, can run this country, can run Italy like a business, they'll cut out all the fluff and everybody will have food and everybody will have, affordable rent and everything will be fine. You just have to trust that rich men know what they're doing. That's how they got to be rich. Despite the fact that is not how rich men got to be rich. Rich men got to be rich by being born rich. Almost always. And these guys, they'll try to sell you on that this is an obvious solution. You know it in your heart, and then people buy into it. And before long, you've got them loading people, human beings, into boxcars and taken away to never be seen or heard from again. And every time that it happens, by the way, it's sold as immigration policy. Every single time. Oh, dirty immigrants. And they'll say it in some way to try and sell you on it. It happened. You say it can't happen here. We did it to Japanese people after Pearl Harbor. The right side of the war. And I do feel that we were on the right side, if there is a right side of that war. Yet we did it too. And this man, Mussolini, he was a brute. He destroyed his country. The man who invented the term fascism destroyed his own people for their ideas, for being a little bit different, and for supporting collectivism, supporting that the people should be the ones to say, whoa, we didn't want this. This isn't what we thought we were putting you into power for. He's the one who started the violence in Italy against his own people and stirred up racial hate among his own people. And when he was done, when that all came to naught, as it always will eventually, his people were the ones who got a hold of him. By that point, there were no courts they could trust. There was no justice system. There was no due process left. It was just the people's justice. You look at the storming of the Bastille in France, and you find out what the people's justice can look like. Right or wrong doesn't really enter into it at that point. That point is natural consequence of oppression. You look at what happened in the French Revolution. It was not pretty. Look, we glamorize revolution in this country especially. We make it a glamorous thing. People taking up arms to protect each other and save each other from tyrants. But let no one have any delusions about this. The actual act of doing it is an ugly, brutal thing. It is not pretty. And then yesterday, I saw this footage. Maybe I can find it now. Of an Episcopalian minister in the archdiocese, of Baltimore. Let me see if I can find it right now. Show it to you. Got up following what happened this week with Renee Good. I don't see it here. Stood up and said, I have told our people, I believe he's talking specifically about the clergy, but I think he was including the lay clergy in that. Which says, and he's standing in front of a microphone. He's not in church, as far as I can tell. It looks like he's out on the street. And he stood there and he said, I have told my people, get your affairs in order. This is the level it's come to. Get your wills set up. Get ready for the end, for your individual end. He's not talking about the apocalypse. He's not talking about Jesus coming back. He's talking about the U.S. government. He's talking about the U.S. people. He's talking about people like Renee Good. And he says, the time has come where we need to be prepared to put our bodies between the government and marginalized groups, marginalized people. This is where we are. Every time a person under an oppressive regime is denied due process, it strengthens the resolve of the people standing around watching it to say this oppressor doesn't deserve due process. That's how Mussolini died. The number of people who said these people are just communists. Maybe you don't like what they have to say. Maybe you don't like what they think. Maybe they're wrong, but they don't deserve to die for it. And there we are again. Maybe Charlie Kirk was wrong. I guarantee you he was wrong. I guarantee you he was wrong about most things. At least the things that he said, which it turns out Charlie Kirk would say anything he was paid to say. But the things he said were awful, horrible, hateful things, misogynistic things, inhuman things. In some cases, about his own children. That's not a good father. That's not a good man. That's not somebody who deserves to be lionized just because he died. Instead, there's this reaction that we should have, could have, need to have, which is that nobody deserves to die for the things they think or the things they believe. Because when we get to the point where we can sell each other on, well, that person thinks the wrong way, so they have to die, then there's no end to the violence. An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind at that point. And okay, Charlie Kirk needs to be allowed to be wrong. He needs to be allowed to stand up and say what he wants to say, so that people can point to it and say that's what it looks like to be wrong. To get up and be proud of being wrong. And when he says, why are they stirring up? Why are they trying to divide us? Why are they trying to, with their divisive rhetoric? It's because that's what it means to live in a society with free speech. Free speech means we are divided. And when people say, why are we so divided these days? Why is everything so divisive? Because you are wrong. There has to be somebody who is wrong, but there has to be an environment where you're allowed to just be wrong. It's okay. That is your right to be wrong. Because once we make it a lethal offense to be wrong, we'll just turn against each other, and the violence will just escalate and escalate and escalate until somebody can return to reason and say, look, so he's wrong. Just let him be wrong. Just let him be wrong. Because once it gets to the place where hate is institutionalized, there's nothing left. That's why it matters how Mussolini died. That's why it matters that there is somebody out there who de-escalates from tell me, Don Miguel, tell me about Del Diablo, or I'll put you on this rack until you die. Down to, well, loosen it up a bit. You're hurting him. And all the way down to cake or death. Well, I'll have cake. If we have to have religion in the world, let it be cake or death. But have lots of cake. Amen.
In a way, a young girl writes treasured thoughts by candlelight, yet unaware, with hopes held fast, these secret words were her last. First book and last, a